Move to the AFC South. We'll do the Colts and the Texans to round this out. Colts have 7 picks, but no first round. Obviously, they traded that to San Francisco when they in the DeForest Buckner trade. To me, this is a draft, I think, for the Colts that works well for the needs they have. This is what I mean. Wide receiver, to me, probably is the most pressing need right now. They have no real depth behind T.Y. Hilton, and they have no really big-bodied receivers that can go up and make a play. T.Y. Hilton is a burner. They have, I'm blanking on his name now, Paris Campbell. Holy cow. He's also another burner, and it was injury-prone last year as well. The Colts have a lot of really fast guys, which works. But, to have a big body receiver like T. Higgins, Laviska Shenault, that would be huge, especially for now you bring in Philip Rivers, who, you look at his time in Los Angeles and San Diego, he does like throwing to big body receivers. He throws a lot of jump balls, go and get it. And maybe you can blame it on, the fact that there's really no separation. He has to do it. But I think, to at least make the transition as easy as possible for Philip Rivers for hopefully this year, just this year. I think a nice big body possession receiver will be huge for the Colts and huge for this receiving core because they have a lot of the same guys. And we saw last year, T.Y. Hilton banged up, Paris Campbell banged up. They don't have much depth, and no one really stood out and came up to the forefront to step up for them when they needed it most. Zach Pascal's a nice story. He played nice towards the end, but is he a number 2 or number 3 receiver? I would be a little shaky if I was relying on him a lot more like the Colts were down the end of the stretch of the season. So one of those guys, T. Higgins, Laviska Shenault, a receiver like that would be huge for this receiving core. I think I would still put quarterback, despite they got Philip Rivers or they signed Philip Rivers in free agency. Despite currently have Jacoby Brissett on the final year of his contract, still in Indianapolis. I think this is a great opportunity to take a project quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round. A guy like Jake Fromm from Georgia, Jacob Eason from Washington come to mind, where those are guys that they have physical tools, they have some intangibles that are there. Not first-round quarterbacks for sure, but I think they're interesting projects to where if you put the behind-the-season veteran like Philip Rivers and a consummate pro like Jacoby Brissett, if he's still there by the time the season starts, I'd be a little surprised if you would. But let's just say, we don't know if they decide to keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster. To me, this is a perfect opportunity to bring in a guy and basically have him sit for a year, learn the NFL system, not put too much on his plate, to where you hope by this time next year, whether it's Fromm, whether it's Eason, whether it's another quarterback that the Colts are intrigued with, maybe it's even Jordan Love, who knows? I don't think the Colts would have traded out of the first round if they liked Love, but maybe that Chris Ballard thinks he can sign him or draft him later in the 2nd round, and that's why he did it. Either way, if they have interest and intrigue in one quarterback, it's a great year to bring him in, sit him down, have him learn behind Philip Rivers, and see if this time next year they're ready to take the reins. Because this Colts team, they are built to win now, but they're also a young team where I think they have the ability right now and still looking for a franchise quarterback to develop and really fit into this core. They have a great young core right now of players that are really performing at high levels, but it's still very young. I think a quarterback this year or next year to bring in to be the franchise guy and develop and build and take this young core and keep them together going forward, I think will be a great addition. So like I said, could be an interesting 2nd or 3rd round. Colts have 2 2nd-round picks. This upcoming draft could be something to watch out for. And finally, tight end. They lost Eric Ebron in free agency. They have solid blocking tight ends and solid legitimate possession receivers in Jack Doyle, Mo Alley Cox. Mo Alley Cox is healthy. That'd be great. But this is also an opportunity later on in the draft to get an athletic, pass-catching tight end. Ebron was out for the Colts, and you saw the first year he was there. He was gangbusters. He had a career year, was unstoppable. That connection between Luck and Ebron was deadly. And now, at least, if you can try to develop that 2.0 with Philip Rivers this year and whatever quarterback you decide to draft this year or next year, bringing with that athletic pass-catching tight end that can split him out, can play all the way on the outside, can line up in the slot, and just could throw it up, and he could be an athlete and go get it, would be a great addition for the Colts. And finally, the Texans, 8 draft picks, obviously no first-round pick. They lost that when they traded for Larry Tunsil. Their biggest lead, ironically, wait for it, wide receiver. Gee, if only they had a franchise wide receiver, a top 5 wide receiver on their team that has, one of the best catch rates in all of the NFL, rarely drops balls, and is one of those reliable targets that even when he's covered, you throw in the area, he'll make the catch. Those guys would be great to have on your team. Julio Jones comes to mind, right? A.J. Green, when he's healthy, comes to mind. Man, wouldn't DeAndre Hopkins be great on this Texans team? Bill O'Brien, man. We talked about it a lot. I don't know what he's doing, what he's thinking, but now you trade away your best wide receiver, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and now you're going to find yourself trying to draft a wide receiver high. Because you look at this receiving core that they have right now. You have Will Fuller, who can't stay on the field, Kenny Stills, nice second or third option, and Randall Cobb. There's no number one option. There's no standout wide receiver. There's no security blanket right now for Deshaun Watson. If only they kept DeAndre Hopkins, this would be so much different. But now the Texans are going back to the drawing board, need to get a receiver early on in the draft, and is similar to the Colts, need a great possession wide receiver. A big body target for Deshaun Watson to hit, to throw to get a catch, a tough catch. Get a wide receiver. If only they had one on their roster just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that would have been ideal. That would have saved them one area of need they could have got, or maybe even build the depth in that receiver room. Instead, you strip it down. You get a banged up running back and an extra second-round pick. Congratulations, Bill O'Brien. Didn't get any value at all. Oh yeah. Pass rush too, I think, is another option that they need. Both inside in the D line, interior, and on the edge rush as well. Lost DJ Reader in free agency, which is a huge, just mammoth roadblock right there in the middle of that defensive line. So you really need help getting to the quarterback more than ever. J.J. Watt, Whitney Merciless, they still have it. Obviously, J.J. Watt can't stay on the field, which is a huge, huge issue. Still like Whitney Merciless a lot, but they could use some help, use some depth, and again, especially with J.J. Watt basically unable to stay in the field consistently. They need to get a pass rush, a young edge rusher in here to get some pressure on the quarterback, and really, finally, offensive guard. Not tackles are already set. They have two with Titus Howard, Larry Tunsil, but similar to the Ravens, they need help on the interior. They allowed the 8th most sacks last year, 12th most quarterback hits last year, and Deshaun Watson is an extremely mobile guy. Right, he's not a statue behind center. He can escape, and probably the sack rate and the hits would have been a lot higher if he didn't pull a few Houdini acts himself and get out of there. Offensive guard, again, you have your tackle set, help interior, which, as we see too, the best way now to get pressure on a quarterback is interior pressure. So many of the guys are mobile and athletic, are able to get out of the pocket. If you come from within, get pressure from the center and guard positions, it is a great way to throw off young quarterbacks and throw them off their timing. Offensive guard, secure this, give your quarterback and Deshaun Watson a chance. And that will, again, start with interior depth on the offensive line. MLB just laid out a plan, as Jeff Passan's reporting, that they hopefully could resume maybe late May, early June. And I want to get into MLB's plan because, again, it goes back to, it doesn't matter if you're first to resume. It does not matter. It matters if you are right. If you are able to resume and kick things off without a hitch, without getting players sick, without putting players in danger. And again, more importantly, once you get started, you're having the league not shut down. So the report, or I guess the idea, let's say, because it's in infant stages. MLB has never said to run this idea, to implement this idea. They are just merely threw it out and are exploring the options if this is a possibility. Jeff Passan the other day is reporting that Major League Baseball is looking to move all 30 of their teams to Phoenix to start the season in isolation, and basically put an entire bubble around the city of Phoenix, to where the players and the executives and the broadcasters are the only ones that are going to be interacting in that area. And basically they think if they can quarantine these players enough, they can start the season. And their goal and their plan is to play Chase Field, which is the Arizona Diamondbacks Major League ballpark, obviously in Phoenix. And they have 10 spring training facilities around in that area as well. So basically 11 fields that they have accessible to them. They would run a 2 or 3 training camp. And some of the other factors or precautions they would put in to basically prevent as much contact as possible is that they would put an automatic strike zone in. So now the umpire is not behind the catcher, so social distancing can be practiced. There's no mound visits. Obviously, the pitcher, the pitching coach, the catcher, they're close together on mound visits. So they would eliminate mound visits, eliminate umpires behind home plate to, again, enforce social distancing parameters that are going on right now. They would institute 7-inning doubleheaders, which we talked about a little bit on Monday. I'm not the biggest fan of those. I think it's more of just a cheap way to try to make up as many games as possible. And instead of having players sit in a dugout, which obviously we see all the time, they would sit in the stands because there would be no fans in the stands, and they would basically sit 6 feet apart from each other. So you have players sitting in the stands a few seats away from each other, and that's how basically that would happen when they're sitting or when they're at bat or when the player's on the bench. I have a few issues with this because I don't think this is a feasible idea and a sustainable idea, and I have a few worries. And at least one of those is that, so obviously despite the isolation, despite the fact that you are basically kicking everyone out of Phoenix and putting just these players, club executives, coaches, managers, umpires, basically everyone that is going to be there at the game trying to help out in one way or another, just because you're putting them in isolation in a city where obviously it's a desert, it's very hot. We'll get to that in a little bit as well. There's no guarantee that you can stop one of these players from getting the virus, right? I think about all the people that are going to be associated just with this game if you keep it bare bones as minimal as possible. So you're going to have at least, if you do the quick math, you have 25 players per team. Let's say you have 5 or 6 coaches per team at the absolute bare minimum. If you bring all 30 teams to one city in Phoenix, you're going to have at the absolute minimum 1,200 players and coaches there. Just players and coaches, 1,200. Not to mention trainers, grounds crew, clubhouse assistants, umpires, broadcasters, cameramen. There's going to be basically at least 2,000 people descending upon the city of Arizona in a time where currently right now, at least up until May 1st, we can't have more than 10 people gather at a time. Think about that. Right now until May 1st, so another 3 weeks, we are not allowed anywhere in this country to have more than 10 people together at one time. And now MLB is going to, in a few weeks after that, hope to put at least 2,000 people together in one area, in one concentrated area. Let alone, and again, those 2,000 people aren't even counting hotel workers, bus drivers, chefs, even just team executives. All these people are going to have to be there because if you're going, the plan for MLB is at least to put these players basically in isolation. You're going to put them in a hotel room. Basically, they say you can't leave your hotel room unless it's going to the field. That's it. So the idea of quarantining is they're going to do as much as possible makes sense, but still, there's no guarantee and there's no proven way to show that just by quarantining these players, putting them in hotels, quarantining the hotel workers, the bellhops, the bus drivers, everyone basically associated with this operation doesn't guarantee that no one will get the virus. And not to mention, just because most of these players are young, right? Obviously, they're in their mid-20s, low 20s, worst case scenario, mid-30s. What about the coaches? You have coaches like Joe Madden, who is 66. Dusty Baker is 70 years old, coaching for the Astros. 70. Brian Snitker of the Braves is 64. Not to mention the other support staff, the trainers, the clubhouse attendants, executives, social media heads, other support staff, broadcasters. Not everybody is young. Just because the baseball players are young doesn't mean that they, and just because, first of all, they're young doesn't mean that they won't get the virus and it won't affect them negatively. You have people at risk, the most at-risk group of people, elderly, are coaching the game of baseball, going to be surrounded by these players day in and day out. Doesn't matter if they're quarantined by themselves. Doesn't matter if they're basically going to their hotel room by themselves. We've seen there's zero guarantee that could prevent the virus from going to someone. There basically is not. It's a crapshoot. So they could try all they want to isolate these players as much as possible. There's still no guarantee that they will not come in contact with someone who could be exposed to the virus one way or another. And now you're putting at-risk adults in, again, Joe Madden, Dusty Baker, Brian Snitker. Those are just 3 examples of managers in their 60s and 70s, let alone, again, umpires, support staff, executives. There are older people that are going to be around these players and around this game. That, to me, is too much risk. There's too much risk to go on that makes this worth it. And not to mention, too, like I said, what happens if one player does get sick? Now, the MLB, in their statement and their idea, at least had some ideas for this, because that's obviously the biggest question. What happens if someone inevitably does get sick? You have to have some sort of plan for that. You could try your best to limit their exposure and hope they don't get sick, but what happens if they get sick?